A promise was made to hundreds of men, a promise that was supposed to save their lives, but instead, it would end up destroying them. Okay, so picture this. It's 1932. The Great Depression has its grip on the entire country, especially in rural Alabama. You're a black sharecropper in Macon County, and things are tough, really tough. Then, a group of government doctors shows up with what sounds like a miracle. And what are they offering? Free medical care. For life! I mean, can you imagine the relief? This isn't just about a checkup. This is a lifeline. They're talking free exams, free rides to the clinic, even hot meals. And get this, burial insurance, a promise of dignity even in death. All you had to do was say yes. But it was a lie, a complete and total lie. And every single part of that promise was designed to hide an absolutely horrifying truth. Because the goal wasn't to cure them. These men weren't patients at all. They were subjects. They were human guinea pigs in an experiment designed to answer a terrible question. What happens to the human body when a devastating disease is just left to run its course? And this experiment didn't last a year or 5 years. It went on for 40 years. 40. Through different presidents, through incredible medical breakthroughs. When the truth finally came out in 1972, people were understandably outraged. So the government formed a special panel to figure out one thing. How on earth could this have happened? And this is the official report that came out of that investigation. It's the document that exposed the whole truth. Welcome to Veiled Histories. This is what we do here. We dive into official documents like this one to bring these hidden stories into the light. And this report is going to be our guide as we unpack a medical betrayal that, trust me, we still feel the effects of today. So, let's get into it. All right, let's start with the lie itself. A 40-year lie. What was the central deception at the heart of this whole thing? Well, the promise was treatment for something they called bad blood. It was a vague, catch-all term people used back then for all sorts of sicknesses. But the reality? The doctors knew exactly what these men had. It was syphilis. And the reality was, they were part of an experiment to study untreated syphilis. They had absolutely zero intention of curing them, ever. The official name for this was the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. They recruited 399 black men who already had syphilis. These were the test subjects. Then they brought in 201 men who didn't have it to act as a control group. And the entire point of the study was just to watch, to document how the disease ravaged their bodies. And then, after they died, to perform autopsies to see the damage up close. Okay, so now the investigation begins. When that special panel got to work in 1972, their job was basically to perform an autopsy on the study itself, to dissect every single decision made over those 40 years. Their mission, their official charter, was super clear. Investigate everything about the study. They needed to find out how it started, why it was allowed to continue for so long, and what, if anything, could be done for the men who were still alive. And they started with a really big question. Was this study justified? You know, even by the standards of 1932? Maybe things were just different back then? Could this have been seen as okay when it started? The panel went digging through all the records to find out. And their answer was a hard no. The panel's verdict was crystal clear. They said, in retrospect, the Public Health Service study was ethically unjustified in 1932. So no excuses. Even by the standards of the time, this thing was wrong from day one. They knew the risks, and there was zero proof the men ever actually agreed to be part of an experiment. You know, this is exactly why we do what we do here at Veiled Histories. These veiled stories, buried in official reports, have the power to change our world, but only if we bring them into the light. If you believe these stories have to be told, you can help us do that. Just by hitting that like button and subscribing, you help this explainer reach more people. It really, truly makes a difference. Now, this is where the story goes from unethical to just monstrous. Look at this timeline. The study starts in 32, but then in the 1940s, everything changes. Penicillin is discovered. It's a miracle drug, and it becomes the standard, easy cure for syphilis everywhere. The researchers in the study, they knew this. They had the cure in their hands. And for almost 30 more years, they chose to do nothing. They just kept watching. So that brings us to the panel's next big question, and this one is maybe the most important. Should the study have been stopped the second a cure was found? Was there any possible justification for letting it go on? And again, the panel did not mince words. Their report says it all. Penicillin therapy should have been made available to the participants. They went on to say that withholding it amplified the injustice. It wasn't just a failure to act, it was actively making a terrible situation so much worse. A massive moral failure. So the panel delivers this damning verdict. And as they kept digging, the violations they found just kept piling up. It gets pretty shocking. The big one, the absolute foundation of all ethical research, is something called informed consent, and the panel found zero evidence that it ever happened. The men had no idea they were in an experiment. They weren't told what syphilis was or the risks. They never ever had a chance to say, "No, I don't want to be a part of this." And this wasn't a case of just not telling them. The researchers actively worked to deny them treatment. They were given placebos, sugar pills, and told it was medicine. And get this, when World War II started, the researchers actually sent a list of the men's names to the local draft board to make sure they wouldn't get drafted. Why? Because if they joined the army, they would have gotten a standard physical, been diagnosed, and been cured. They went out of their way to stop them from getting help. So, the study finally ends in 1972, but that is far from the end of the story. When this all came out, it sent shockwaves across the entire country, and it created this legacy of mistrust, one that's still very much with us today. But if there's one silver lining to this awful story, it's that this tragedy forced a change. The public outrage was so huge, it led directly to the rules we have today to protect people in research. Things like mandatory informed consent became law, and we created what are called institutional review boards, or IRBs. Basically, they're ethics committees that have to approve any research on humans to make sure something like this can never, ever happen again. But all of those reforms came too late for the men in the study. By the time it was shut down in 1972, only about 125 of the original participants were still alive. Hundreds had already died, many directly from syphilis or its complications. And tragically, many had passed the disease on to their families without even knowing. And that leaves us with a final, really difficult question, because the damage here wasn't just physical. The study shattered faith in doctors, in the government, in medicine itself. It created this deep mistrust in many communities that you can still see today. So how do you rebuild trust that was so completely and utterly broken? When the people who are supposed to heal you are the ones who deceive you, how do you ever get that back?